The following presentation will examine a small First Nations reserve known as Attawapiskat. The small Indigenous community declared a suicide crisis in April of 2016 and received little response from the Canadian government. This presentation will describe the state of emergency, the underlying causes, community impacts, and finally, it will examine ways in which community organizing plays a vital role in creating solutions to the problem. Where? The Attawapiskat First Nation is located at the mouth of the Attawapiskat River in James Bay, Northern Ontario.
Who? Attawapiskat is home to 2,000 Indigenous peoples.
What? Attawapiskat declared their fifth state of emergency in the last 10 years. Their previous states of emergency had been due to flooding, overcrowded housing, poor drinking water, and problems regards to access to food, education, and employment. The state of emergency that will be focused on is due to a declared suicide crisis within the community. In March of 2016 alone, there were 28 suicide attempts, and as of the first half of April 2016, there had been 15 attempts. In total, from fall 2015 to April 2016, there were a total of 101 suicide attempts.
Mental health has been ignored for far too long in Indigenous communities, and such health problems are rooted in the intergenerational trauma experienced by the community. There is a lack of mental health services and resources that are accessible to community members. Attawapiskat has a 15-bed hospital with no full-time doctors. They only fly in 4 days a week, 3 weeks of the month. On weekends and evenings, only 2 nurses are on duty, as reported by The Star in 2016. In addition, at the time, there had not been a mental health worker on the reservation in 9 months because of a shortage of housing.
When? The crisis began in 2015. The death of 13-year-old Sheridan Hookama in October of 2015 is the one fatality to date from the alarmingly high rates of suicide attempts that occurred beginning in September 2015. In early April 2016, after 11 Indigenous youth tried to commit suicide, the Canadian government responded by sending 2 additional mental health workers to the community.
Why the high rates of suicide attempts? Intergenerational trauma, poor housing, lack of access to food, clean drinking water, education, and employment, lack of recreation facilities and youth programs, lack of mental health workers and mental health training, and suicide prevention programs. Prior to the crisis, Attawapiskat had 4 crisis workers, 1 worker, and 1 support worker. There was no professionally trained mental health providers.
How can we make a change? Advocacy for equitable services provided in all areas of kids' experience, according to Cindy Blackstock. Advocacy through participation in healing walks, rallying, and allow for the voices of Indigenous peoples to be heard. Holding the government accountable for their actions to rebuild relationships with Indigenous peoples with truth and reconciliation.
Providing services and resources to children and communities, health services as well as recreation and education facilities, listen to Indigenous youth, learn what they need and what they want from them, not what the government believes is most helpful, help to improve the living conditions of Indigenous peoples through housing, clean water, food, employment, and education.
Community organizing. There is no single solution for what has become one of the most pressing tragedies this nation of Canada faces. So how will they get better? The government will not be able to create a solution for this crisis alone. The community itself plays a vital role in working towards the healing of youth. However, the government will need to commit to providing financial resources for the community so they can afford the resources they need.
Joseph Boyden, an author who works towards being a strong advocate for Indigenous communities, explains that the equal ability to receive a proper education in your own community in all its forms, curricula that teach children about their culture and their language and their land. When children learn the importance of where they come from and who they are and that others in the world care for them, they begin to internalize that vital ingredient of self-esteem, a sense of pride in self and in community.
In an article written in the Globe and Mail in 2016, Dr. McCormick, who was interviewed in the article, has been examining historical healing practices that could help mental health within Indigenous communities today, especially among the youth. He has stated, "So I think healing has to come from within the community, both at the individual level through resilience training and through the community being re-empowered, to realize that you do have solutions."
Naming ceremonies are used to help individual community members who are struggling. The youth would be given a traditional name, which usually comes from an ancestor. The family and community agree to take responsibility to watch over the youth and lend a helping hand as they work to live up their ancestor's name.
A successful intervention in Indigenous communities has been the formation of mental health teams who are trained in suicide prevention, CPR, and crisis interventions. We are able to relate the mental health training process to the 7 steps of community organizing. The formation of the mental health teams relates to the first stage of community organizing of pre-contact by hiring and setting objectives for the team.
A CBC News article in 2016 shows how the capacity is in communities. They know their own people, they know their own culture, they're able to provide follow-up support, and they're able to create a relationship of trust and safety for people who are really vulnerable. This relates to the second stage of community organizing of contact and engagement by building relationships and being accepted by the community through the action of the workers.
Each member of the prevention team will receive training in counseling, crisis debriefing, and first aid/CPR. This addresses the third aspect of community organizing, which is community research. This includes identifying action issues, which in this case is the need for crisis training, and then creating the team of workers or organization.
After providing training to the team, the group will then decide how to deliver their services in a way that fits within their culture. This amplifies the 4th stage of community organization through organization development by building the team and establishing working relationships between the community and the organization.
We feel that a suicide prevention team would provide this community with much more than the goal of lower suicide attempt rates. It will allow for certain members to receive training, employment that will provide each member of the community a sense of pride and keep the organization going. This addresses popular action by keeping the organization continuing. Evaluation and ending are the final stages of community organizing, which include monitoring results and maintaining contact and relationship with the developed organizations or teams. The crisis in Attawapiskat is still an issue that needs to be addressed by the Canadian government, as well as Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Through community organizing and the cooperation of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, future crises such as that in Attawapiskat can be prevented.
Oh.